Stefka. So then several months from now.
And go to the front, Joe.
I know.
Take your remote.
Okay, give everyone find a place to sit, we'll get started.
Exciting down below.
Welcome everyone. All right, thanks for everyone for showing up today in person and online to NoCo Housing Now, our June event. We're going to talk about partnerships, but before we get started, I first want to just mention our sponsors for today. And on behalf of the Chamber, I want to thank Ansel Credit Union, Kaiser Permanente, and Northern Engineering as our silver sponsors. New Colony Apartments, Somerset Apartments, and UC Health as bronze sponsors. So that's what helps us put on these events and hold your costs down to the gas and cost. It's not free anymore. So thank you all for taking the time to come out today, and hope you'll enjoy the conversation. And again, for those who are online, we will be monitoring that. So if you have questions, you have comments to offer, please feel free to raise your hand. It's easier to monitor that way. If you use the raise your hand feature, hopefully by now we are all Zoom experts, and you know where to find that at the bottom of your screen on the actions button. So raise your hand if you have a question or comment. Lower your hand after you've done that. And for those of you who are live and in person, just scream it out. That works? Yes, please. Now. I don't really know this stuff. So anyway, for those of you who have not been to one of these events, NoCo Housing NOW is a collaboration of the willing, and we are not an organization, but an initiative to elevate the education, understanding of housing as it relates to public policy and market dynamics. And so it is a volunteer organization, and there's several members who are part of the steering committee here today and online. And so please feel free to come up and talk to any of us afterwards if you want to find out more. And there's also cards on your table if you'd like to be more involved in this conversation. From the content we have today. We'd love to get your name on our mailing list so that we can get invited for future events. So with that, as I mentioned today, we're going to be talking about partnerships. So creating housing opportunity for both for sale and rental housing partnerships. And so today we actually have 4 organizations that are very active in this space. Care Housing, and I'll introduce Dustin and Kim in just a moment. Then we also have Loveland Housing Authority, and Jeff is here. And Elevations Community Land Trust with Stefka Fanchi. She's also presented these events before. And then we're going to wrap it up with Kristin, Candella, who's going to talk to us about One Voice for Housing, which is another communications. And I'll let her tell us all about that. Well, let's get started. And so I'm going to introduce Dustin Barrington and Iwanski. So from Care Housing, they're actually located in Fort Collins, but they are working on a project that incorporates several other partners. So if I could, I'm going to have Dustin, if you want to come up, and we'll get started. Yes, you're going to have to use the microphone. Oh. If you want me to slide.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm happy to be here, and thank you again for coming out and focusing on housing with us today. I see a number of familiar faces, so quite a number of you already know about some of the things that I was going to share. So I may cut down a little bit on what I was going to talk about, but well, first of all, there are 4 things that I'd like to do. I'd like to look at defining partnership, explaining how the affordable housing industry is actually a complex community that is defined by partnership, then identify different levels, challenges, and opportunities that we find within that context of partnership, and discuss just 2 quick examples of what we're doing with partnership with Care Housing. So first of all, the next slide is what is partnership? Quite honestly, partnership is an old idea. From as early as the 1700s, we've got like the commercial type of partnership that most of us think of when we say the word, but as early as the 1300s, the word partner was being used to talk about someone being a sharer or a partaker in something. And as we know, that's a combination, the partnership is a combination of 2 pieces of word, and that suffix ship actually comes from a Middle English word called shite, which is where our modern word for shape it comes from. And so basically, when you put all those things together, what you come up with is that the original foundational term, partnership, literally means an integration of relationships shaped for sharing. And so when we talk about that, we talk about integrating our actions and our intentions for a particular purpose. And here, we're talking about affordable housing. So on the next slide, we've got a number of different things that come together to make a community of partnership. So with diversity, of course, you know, most of you who have been involved with housing, you know that we have a number of different professions, a number of different levels, challenges, and opportunities. And what this does is it creates a context where there are a lot of different perspectives, priorities, and motivations, and yet they're all interconnected and interdependent. But paradoxically, for those of you who aren't in affordable housing is at the same time collaborative and competitive, and it's market-driven and mission-focused. And the other thing is that it's not only doing that within itself as an industry, but it's also competing with market properties at the same time as it's goal-oriented toward providing a social good. And so, you know, when some folks talk about affordable housing, they kind of set it off as something that is other because it includes government subsidies. But one of the things to pay attention to is that even though it is subsidized, it still is required to be self-sufficient because at the end of the day, it's a business, not a charity. And so I like to use the analogy of like an ecosystem where, you know, any kind of one particular life in an ecosystem, if it's benefited, it ultimately ends up benefiting the whole. Or maybe like a professional sports franchise, where, you know, you have athletes who compete against each other in order to be a part of a team, and yet that team is collaborating together for benefit, and yet when that team collaborates together for benefit, they go out to compete against other teams. And so there is this back and forth of collaboration and cooperation. I kind of call it co-opetition, is to make sense of it all. But the good news is that when affordable housing wins, everybody wins. So on my next slide, I'd like to talk just really quickly for those of you who aren't involved in affordable housing about what the complexity of partnership is, because quite often we don't realize that there are so many different factors that go into this. Like, for example, at a community level, we have state, local, and federal government interactions, and those are a lot of the places that we receive our subsidies from. But those subsidies include tax credits and private activity bonds. It includes community development block grants. It involves home funds. There's a lot of different complexity there. And then also within our community, we also have different structures of government. And so, you know, that would include not only our elected officials who help us with legislation and initiatives, but also our non-elected city, county, and state staff who help us with regulations, rules, compliance, all the things that come with that funding. And then in our community as well, we also have a number of supporters, like, you know, what this meeting that we're part of today. And we have folks that engage in advocacy, engagement, political activism, but we also have individuals from the community that get involved with direct investment or volunteerism. And then, so that's kind of how the community engages. Within the community, we engage as organizations, and we have housing authorities, nonprofit and for-profit developers. We've got property owners, property managers, service providers, and we're very fortunate here in northern Colorado that there's just something in the water that makes us work together. We're a very collaborative kind of culture up here in northern Colorado, and so we've got a lot of local and regional strategy to coordinate resource allocations and working together to make sure that we're sharing information and training and cooperating on service provision. But at the same time, for those of you who aren't aware, we're also competing against each other when it comes to funding. And so we're at once working together side by side, and we have to be careful to avoid from being complicated. But nevertheless, it's because of the relationships and the partnerships that we have that makes that possible. So then, of course, once we get down to the project level, most of you who've been involved with development, you know that there are architects, designers, engineers, land planners, energy consultants, general contractors, subcontractors to make a great project. But with affordable housing, we have affordable housing specific investors, syndicators, lenders, foundations, donors, tax credit consultants, accountants, lawyers that help us not only to fund great projects, but to help us create these complex capital stacks that are needed and to maintain our legalities. Because all those special sources of funding come with special requirements. And at Care Housing, we kind of go to another level yet, because that's something that's within our control. We actually have partnerships with our residents. In that, as a core value, we believe in meeting with our resident voice. And so we have worked toward becoming a CHODO organization, which basically means that a third of our board is represented by folks who are in affordable housing or represent populations that are associated with lower incomes. And the reason why we do this is because the statistics that come to us about the role of affordable housing in individual and family success clearly show that stable housing is probably the single best indicator of personal and social success. Stable housing correlates directly to improved physical and mental health, educational outcomes, employment stability, and other key metrics. And quite honestly, the safe, stable housing is a proven catalyst of human growth. So there's a lot of information in all of this. I'll just remind you there's not going to be a test. Okay, but I'm going to go toward challenges with partnership, and kind of alluded to this a little bit. And now that I've had a chance to actually look at the tags that were on people's shirts and on the table, I know that you know a lot of this stuff. So I'm going to kind of gloss a little bit in this next section, but limited resources to meet the demand. There is a huge demand for affordable housing, and we just don't have enough resources to meet it. And so if it were easy, everybody would be doing it, and they're not, and we are. So here we are, kudos to us, right? And the thing is that we are competing and cooperating at the same time for those limited resources. So we have to rise above, and we have to be led by something that is bigger and better than just our own personal interests and or the interests of our organization. The other thing that is going on as well that our challenges, we're still on that one, sorry about that, is what I would refer to as divergent priorities. Affordable housing is an industry in and of itself, and so there is a lot of complexity, there's a lot of different roles and responsibilities. And you have things like where lenders and investors are interested in relatively low risk over a long period of time. And then you've got folks like us that are more oriented toward development, that we want to see those units housed with people as soon as possible. So we have a larger appetite for higher risk, and we have a shorter time frame that we're interested in seeing those things occur. And yet those have to balance out. Housing is a basic need, and yet it is also an economy. And it is a commodity. We have government motivations because the reason why they're incentivizing certain things is because they want certain results. Well, the investors that are taking advantage of those incentives, they have reasons for that, and they want other things. So those have to balance out. And then, quite honestly, we come to something that has been with us since the beginning of our nation. There's a foundational issue at stake between constitutional and economic rights. In the Thomas Jefferson, in the Constitution, have come through with the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if you look at the Federalist Papers, when they talked about the pursuit of happiness, what they were talking about was the capacity and opportunity to live a morally good life. So in other words, if we were to translate that into modern day parlance, it would be the opportunity to be good and to do good. And then, but the thing is that Thomas Jefferson didn't necessarily get that three section or that three-point structure from thin air. He actually pulled it from John Locke, who we know is one of the founders of our modern economic theories, and his correlation or his setup of those three was life, liberty, and property, which is oriented toward ownership, capitalization, and consumption. So when you talk about housing, you've got those two things coming together and unfortunately kind of coming into contention, because housing is at once a biological need, a component of opportunity, and a privilege of fiscal responsibility. So we have to ask ourselves, is it an alienable right, a right, if you don't have the means to exercise it? Or is it just a privilege? Well, after almost 300 years, we still haven't figured that out. And so that is something where our constitutional idealism is in contention with our economic pragmatism. And that leads us to probably one of the biggest challenges for affordable housing, which is NIMBY. If you haven't heard of NIMBY before, it is short for not in my backyard. And basically what that is in theory, many people recognize that housing is part of what creates opportunity. And so yes, they agree that there is a need for affordable housing, but from an economic perspective, they don't want it in their backyard where it's going to have a direct effect on them, even though, quite honestly, when you look at it, it doesn't have an effect, and it is it's statistically proven that affordable housing brings benefit to the entire community. But nevertheless, when we talk about NIMBY, it's not just that, oh, those angry, selfish people over there. It's a question that we have to ask our whole society about how we think about each other. And so there are the social and the personal dynamics of us and them that goes into that. So, but in our next slide, of course, we have the opportunities for partnership. And those opportunities literally are first to learn and to understand the dynamics of affordable housing and what needs to go into it. And I would invite anybody who hasn't already to consider the possibility of going to one of our affordable housing conferences here in Colorado. They're a fantastic educational opportunity. And then the other thing, of course, is to literally engage, get involved with your time and talents as a volunteer and or voting, advocating, and supporting affordable housing through the different initiatives that come up within society. And then finally, I'd like to share some examples that we have at Care Housing for partnership. One is Swallow Road Apartments, which we are currently working on right now. Kim is actually the project manager, and she's been doing a fantastic job of driving that one home. We are probably at about 80% and we'll be finished within the
Morning. How are you? I'm tired a little bit, but I slept pretty good.
Oh, okay. That's great. So that was the partnership component of Swallow Road Apartments is that we actually partnered with our local housing authority, Housing Catalyst. There were two affordable projects right next to each other, and so they owned one, we owned the other. We actually purchased theirs, and then we co-developed together, which, you know, having two developers in, you know, it's like having two drivers in one car. There are some opportunities for partnership there. But basically what we did is we created economies of scale, efficiencies of operation, and the proceeds from the sale of that project actually went into the capital stack for another project that produced more affordable housing. So what we did is they gave us a better deal on the affordable housing, and we gave them a better deal on the developer fee so that we could release those funds so that we get what we need, they get what they need, and the community gets more affordable housing. So that's one way that you can do partnership. And of course, we prioritize like vacancies for service providers that also work with housing people who are vulnerable, things like that. We partner with other service providers in our community to do like after school programs and other programs that help to improve the lives of our residents. So that's Swallow Road. And then the one that we're really excited about right now is Heartside Hill. We're currently in the process of going through our entitlement with the city of Fort Collins. We've got, it's almost a little bit of a story, really, because Hard Rock's Christian Church had 9 acres that they've had for a long time. And they decided that they wanted to do something to really make a community impact. And they felt like affordable housing was a significant component of what we need. And so they actually opened up an RFP process. We submitted, as did a few other different organizations. And what church did is they just kind of accepted everybody. And so we are now partners with Fort Collins Habitat for Humanity. We're partners with Arch, Fort Collins, and the church. And what we're doing, first of all, is as a partnership, we actually created an LLC between CARE and the church to be a master developer for the site. And then once that master development is done, then we're going to sell portions of it to CARE, to Habitat, to Arch. And we're also going to add a community building that has an early childhood education center and has mental health, behavioral health services, pediatric care. We've got a lot of different things that we're pushing into that. But the point is that, and in all of it, it's only possible because of partnership, because we don't necessarily have the capacity to do all those different things, but as a group, we do all together. And so, you know, as we've been working through this, we've garnished a little bit of attention. And in April, we actually had a visit from the governor, Senator Goose, our state representatives, county commissioners, staff from the city. And basically, the reason why they came is because our project, which is heavily oriented toward partnership, is what is being recognized as being transformational. And given that, you know, of course, we're not excited about the pandemic, but the silver lining on that cloud is that the American Rescue Plan Act has infused a lot of funding to create opportunities for us to do better as communities including people who have less opportunity. And this project kind of landed right in the middle of their sweet spot. So we're really excited about that. And we, yeah, if there are any questions about that particular project, look forward to hearing from them. So just to kind of wrap up, you know, my last slide is just that, you know, we're defining partnership as integration for a purpose. And there is a lot of complexity in affordable housing, but we're coming together as a community because we're committed to partnership. There are a lot of different complications related to it. There's a lot of different challenges, but there's also a lot of different opportunities, and we're doing it. And if we can do it, we can all. So that's my point.
So yeah, as I mentioned, we'll have time for questions and answers, but first let's jump with Jeff Feneis with the Loveland Housing.
Morning, everybody. Thanks for having me. Again, I'm Jeff from the Loveland Housing Authority, and I'm here specifically to talk about a GRACE project, which was a really cool partnership project. But before we get there, I want to touch on a couple points that Dustin brought up. One, unfortunately, NIMBY is real, and we see it, but sometimes the humor comes out. We had a phase 3 for one of our projects, having our community meetings. Of course, the neighbor showed up, and we had one guy in the drunkiest property that said, "Hey, you know, as an authority, you're decreasing the value of the property. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to compensate?" And then he turned around and said, "And it's because you, my property taxes are going up." Like, well, it's a math equation. It's not because your property value. So, you know, just have to keep it in context. But on the partnership side of it, I cannot stress enough, or re-stress the point that Dustin made, that everything we do is in partnership. Even if it's I don't want to say routine, because no deal is routine, but if it's a typical tax credit partnership, it's called partnership for a reason. We've got the investor, and of course, our consultants, all our other funders, everybody that helps make it happen. But what we're realizing is that as we get challenged by the general population in the city of Loveland to do more, work outside of our normal 30 to 60% AMI box and continue on housing, we recognize it's going to continue to take more innovation through partnerships and really need the opportunities like Care Housing has been. And like we had a good fortune of doing that. So before I get into this, just a little historical context to maybe help answer the question, why did the housing authority do this in the first place, besides little craziness. A couple of things kind of works. One, I happened to be on the Habitat board at the time and was familiar with what they were seeing, running out of lots that they were looking at for 5 years, and started to ask the question, no answer. When next? What happens? Maybe we're even at a high level starting to consider maybe a completely different model, historical habitat model, because of the lack of lots. At the same time, 4 or 5 years ago, you all remember the market was changing, and we, in northern Colorado as a whole, was starting to lose 80 to 120% AMI homeownership. So, a different area than we had worked in before with the city council at the time, and others in the community. We're starting to approach the housing authority, basically saying, in my words, hey, the definition of affordable housing is changing. It's expanding. You are the housing authority. And so we had actually started to look at how do we condos, as you all know, are difficult. The legal issues around building smaller, building lots. In the past, we've proven ourselves we're pretty good at losing money, building single family homes. And really trying to figure it out when all of a sudden, opportunity struck. And sometimes we do what we do through good planning, and sometimes it's opportunity that falls in our lap. And that's what happened. And what happened was Grace Community Church in Loveland approached Habitat about donating 9 acres that they had with the intent of building Habitat. They had owned the land for about 15 years at that point. The church running. And for all the right reasons, decided they didn't want to be developers and buy this. So they wanted to donate it. Habitat approached us since we're developers versus them. Hey, can we pull this off? With a little swagger, I said, free land. Yeah, we can make this work. How hard can that be? And so one thing led to another, and the church actually had 14 acres total. Their original plan was to sell the remaining 5 acres, hoping to recover the costs that they had paid for the entire. So it makes a great story to say that they donated land. In reality, the housing authority got a smoking deal. We paid $300,000 for all of it, with the understanding that we would master develop it. Never heard that before, but with the understanding that we would master develop the entire site to include Habitat, the housing authority, the different products that we build. And in the beginning, I think it's important to note, we tried to bring in a market rate builder that was going to serve 80 to 120%. And short story is, it didn't work. Still friends, but it didn't work because we just couldn't move fast enough for them to keep up with it. So in the end, with this project, we'll create these 167 affordable units, 47 of those will be traditional single-family home lots or habitat. And then 2 lots for the housing authority that will accommodate 60 units of light tech development. And what I really like about this is the diversity of housing options. We serve 30 to 60% rental. The habitat will serve on this project 35% AMI, up to 69% AMI. They would like to go higher right now to get the affordability benefits from the city of Loveland. That's as high as we can go. Hopefully. And then I also like to point out that through the development process, the stormwater department approached us and said, you know, a lot of water from Derby Hill collects down there, passes through there. We'd like to add this $1.5 million detention system of ponds that we're willing to pay for the corporation. Being good partners, we said yes, which slowed us down about a year. So here's the site plan. The colored portion are the habitat lots. And then I should say this is located near Highway 402 in 387. You're familiar with the Loveland Garden Center, that's on the top of the page there. White side is the bottom. So the single family homes, 47 lots. And then on the right side there, the uncolored portion is where we are starting to plan 2 phases of apartments. To pull this off, next slide, please. To pull this off, this is where the partnership piece really came in. And again, first time around the block for us doing a project like this, we knew to meet our cost targets, we were really going to have to skinny up our budget and do what we could to keep the costs down. And everybody that you see up here somehow contributed something to bring the costs down. I won't go through my name, but a lot of them are technical consultants that agreed to work for a reduced fee. In the case of bigger construction, 0% profit on this one. We had a little leverage because they had just finished 2 projects for us. Come on, how about it? When they did board construction, this is a good example. They did not contribute any money, but they contributed a whole lot of dirt that we had to import. Happened to be on the side of the hill. This is probably a good time to note that one thing I learned on this project is that free land is not cheap. Board construction bailed us out by everybody wanted dirt. Still took about $1 million worth of retaining walls to keep it in place. But we got it done. And you don't do that. And I also want to recognize A&D Bank. That should be up here. Brian's in the audience here. They provided the construction lending on this one, and of course they gave us a great rate. But equally as important, a lot of flexibility as we went through, a lot of understandings. I had some budget overruns. We'll get to in a minute. I have to say, Ryan never said keep going. Thanks for letting us be a part. So the original budget was about $6.9 million. 2.1 of that was for the habitat, or sorry, the housing authority lots. And to get to that cost, we know if we're in for about $17,000 to $18,000 a door, we can make the light tech deal on down the road. Once we get in for more than that, then we start struggling to make the portfolio work. So that's how we came up with that. And then 3.3 million for the habitat portion, which comes out to $70,000 per lot, which I have to admit is a little higher than my original goal, but I had to do a reset along the way. In a market rate lot in Loveland right now, if you can even find on the low end, is 100, 120, mostly about 35. Megan's not in her head because she's got a project on the older team. So in the end, I reconciled with myself that we did a lot of good work, even though we misplanned our. And then the last $1.5 million is to fund the drainage project that I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. And for that, we agreed to fund it up front, and then the city pays us back over time for 5 years. Right then, to do. So here's some pictures along the way. And then the next slide.
I think I'm off.
There we go. And here's what it looked like yesterday. We're almost done. I'm happy to report, by the first week of July, we're expecting the city to sign off. Paving will be done Tuesday. Maybe Wednesday, right? It'll be done. And then a little bit of landscaping and the final utilities. And then we expect to be selling the lots to Habitat late July. So feeling really good about that. One other thing, in the name of partnership, just the uniqueness of this project, an important piece that I overlooked, is Grace Community Church donated this parcel. Okay. But we're building next to Derby Hill Baptist Church. And when we were out there walking the site, and it was just weeds, Dave Harry, the pastor of Derby Hill, came out and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he's a big supporter of Habitat. He knew their director. We struck up a conversation, and he was really disappointed. Boy, I wish we could contribute to a project like this. And lo and behold, about a year later, as we were trying to maximize density, because you all know we need to do, the civil engineer said, "You know, if we had 50 feet more, we could squeeze in 8 more lots." Oh, Dave said he wanted to be involved. Why don't we just ask? And lo and behold, he did. He donated 50 feet. And we traded in return for that, we traded them in connection to the new sewer system. So it worked out, another win-win, back to Dustin. But it really made those 8 homes really made a difference, keeping the per lot costs down. So the current status, I told you where we are on schedule. The reality is we're about 5 months behind, which is not our usual pattern. We got delayed by a few things like finding a buried gas line that wasn't on the plat, but luckily nobody got hurt. We had to call a timeout, spend about 6 weeks to design around it, resulted in yet another retaining wall, another few $100,000. But in all, by the time we were done, I'm almost embarrassed to say we're about $617,000 worth of change orders, and we only had a $242,000 contingency. Now, what I will say is that in hindsight, that was just too steep. And if we had to do this again, we would budget 10%, which is the industry standard for the North Fork project. Lo and behold, we would have hit the budget. Might sound a little defensive, but that's another one. Because free land is not cheap. The 3.5 is what we carry on our line type deals. We spent 3 years planning before the tractor showed up. Of course, we can do this. So if we had to do it again, we budget a little more for contingency. So overall, we're over budget when you include the contingency, about $375,000. However, the good news is I expect the city of Loveland is going to help us out. At the very beginning of this project, I had approached city council and asked if they would support it. And at the time, just a really high level budget, we had a gap of about 1.1 million. Asked if they could help. Back then, they said, "Well, if you can find half of that, we'll give you the other 550,000." And I never did go back because we made the budget work with that. So I'm hoping when I'm in front of council Tuesday night, planning commission's already agreed to it, approved it. It's coming out of the affordable housing fund. If not, Habitat doesn't work in the more. That's the good news. But it also, the only reason I say that is it really highlights the partnership that we have with the city of Loveland, which is, as a municipality, very supportive of our mission of affordable housing in open to looking at waivers, code changes, funding when they can, getting creative, allowing us to improve an intersection later rather than have to pay for it now. Those types of things, just a great partner for us. So the current schedule, and I'm almost done here. As I said, no later than August 1st, we'll be selling the lots to Habitat, and they've got 5 homes in the queue that they're ready to pull permits on. They were disappointed when the city told them they couldn't pull permits on land they don't own. So, suddenly motivated to get to closing. But in August, they'll be starting to dig the first foundations for those first 5 homes. And then right after that, we'll be planning our apartments. It'll be a 2 to 3 year timeline for us to get a 60-unit apartment building built. But then probably most exciting, why are we doing all this? When are people moving? In fall of next year, the first Habitat homeowners will be moving in. And then in about 2025, assuming we get the credits, assuming we can beat out the care house for tax credit. We'll be funded and pictures of what we envision the final product. All right, and I guess questions later. Thank you.
Move very quickly to Stefka. So please tell us all about what elevations is up there.
Thank you, Jeff. Hi, everybody. I'm Stefka Fanchi, and I'm with Elevation Community Living Trust. And I'm going to talk about 2 projects today that wouldn't have been possible without partnership. But every project we do wouldn't be possible without partnership. And Elevation is really founded on the premise of partnership. Our mission is actually Elevation Community Land Trust partners with local communities to bring equitable opportunity to families through affordable homeownership. And I think it's really important that our mission doesn't say that we build things. It doesn't say that we sustain things or that we raise funds. It says that we partner, right? So that's really the core of who we are. And as usual, I learned a lot of things from the 2 previous speakers that really I wanted to bring up. So Dustin talked a lot about balance, right? That affordable housing is some market and it's some, public benefit, and it's some this and it's some that. Well, community land trusts are all about balance, right? And you can't get that kind of balance without partnership. So what a community land trust is it essentially does what Dustin was talking about earlier, which is looking at that inherent paradox in affordable housing, which is that it is a little bit of someone's right to have a place to live, and it's a little bit about that property and that economic opportunity, right? And somebody's right to make a profit. And what we do is we separate those 2 things out, and we take the second thing out of the equation by separating the land from the home. So community land trusts hold on to the ownership of the land that underlies our home, and we sell the improvements or the home itself to qualified households. We serve folks that are 80% of their median income. And so again, another balance is that they have this affordable place to live. The value of the land is taken with it. They do have access to gain appreciation, to build wealth, pass on intergenerationally, which is really a big basis of that pursuit of happiness, right? But it also, it's not as much as they would be getting if they were at the market. At the same time, we're taking that land, we're holding it in trust and saying, nothing here can ever be utilized on this land other than permanently affordable homeownership. It is now a piece of public infrastructure. That same home, every time it is sold to another qualified family. And we're really taking it off the market. It is now not something that increases in value at the same rate as another lot next door. And so we're basically saying it's out of this big roller coaster of the real estate market. In Fort Collins, we have two projects that we've been working on for several years now. And both of them are like completely underway, which is super, super exciting. And one of the things about real estate, about ownership, about housing and affordable housing in general is that it takes a long time and it's super hard. And the reason that we need to have partnerships is because it's so hard and it takes so long that every month that goes by, a new crop crops up, right? Any delay results in that budget. We see inflation, we see home price going up, we see interest rates rising. Every little tweak changes that formula. And every time we have a new problem, we need to seek a new solution, which means seeking a new partner. I'm going to talk a little bit about two projects where we started out with really strong partnerships, but then really found that we had to add new partners as we went along to make sure that we both could meet those original goals and overcome those new obstacles. So the first one I wanted to talk about is a partnership with Housing Catalyst, who we mentioned earlier. And we worked with Housing Catalyst, and this was all set up because the city of Fort Collins saw that Housing Catalyst was looking to sell some of their scattered rentals in order to take that capital and put it into a new project where they could serve more families and have more units. But the city also was saying, we also we have this great need. It would be such a shame to lose those units, right, onto the market. And so they sort of brought us together, and we saw that we had these competing and yet collaborative needs, right? How can we move both of those at the same time, right? So Elevation Community Land Trust entered into a purchase and sale agreement on 44 homes in Fort Collins, scattered sites in really high opportunity neighborhoods, all walkable to town and just gorgeous, gorgeous places. And those were in public housing. So they were in realm public, which is one reason why this is taking. We've added all of our control, right? And so they had to get these releases from HUD to allow them to sell it. And then they also had to work with all of the existing residents to get them relocated. At the same time, we're like, okay, we're going to buy 44 homes. Are we going to pay for all of those? And what things that the way that we work essentially is that we're going to buy units, they're completed new units, or existing units on the market that we then put a lot of rehab into and then reprice so that they're permanently affordable. So I like to say that we have this great business model where we lose money on every single transaction. Yeah, it's great. Really easy to sell too. Yeah. It's like, what do you get out of this? Like, literally. For some reason, I know people look at it and think that it's got to be a scam somehow. It's not. We just want people to have affordable homes, and we want communities to have that moving forward. And so, how do we fund this? And we kind of shopped it around. We talked to folks, and Chafa came into play. So Chafa, as you all know, is the giant in the affordable housing finance, but they don't really do homeownership money. When they work with homeownership, it's mostly on the mortgage side. They don't really do development, construction financing when it comes to for sale. And this kind of acquisition where you have was really outside their box. And so how do we work with them to get them to understand that this is a big deal, right? We're going to buy these in tranches. We're going to rehab them. We're going to sell half, put another half in rental for another year so that they're not all flooding the market, and kind of have some good time to get over that. And we eventually got them there. So again, that took a really long time. But it would not be possible without Chapel, right? This is, and I will say that over this time period, this has been, I would say 3 years in the making, from the first conversation. At least, maybe 4. It's at least 3 years that we've been talking about this. And during that time, like, obviously a lot of things changed. For starters, we looked at those homes and we were assured that, you know, they didn't really require and of course we couldn't inspect them because they all had occupants in them, right? So going in this, it's a little bit of a different story. Also, we have some historic preservation obligations on some of the homes. Yeah, so things like that, like, again, the budgets. The other side of that coin, the agreed upon price for those units that we agreed upon 3 years ago, now has a wonderful upside value, right? So it doesn't matter to us, it does matter to Chapel. So as we looked at that, over time, they were like, we don't want to lend more than, you know, 80% of the value, not a problem. Except HUD came in and said, we need to put a covenant on these. And this literally just came like 2 months ago. So it had not been underwritten with the covenant, which restricts the value of those properties like forever. And so it had to be completely re-underwritten. So it was really helpful that we had that delay because now we have the value of these units. So you can see here that of those original 70 public housing units, 44 of them were sold to elevation. Some of them were preserved and updated, and some were redeveloped. Out of those, they also got 70 new affordable housing vouchers that folks were able, they're mobile vouchers that they were able to take with them. So again, it's a big. Got public housing units, 70 public housing units starting with that. They got 49 new units, 68 preserved units, 70 vouchers, and 44 new homeownership opportunities. So really just an exponential win for Fort Collins. So here as well, we'll talk about one of our partners being the public housing residents themselves. There was a long process talking with them initially that we said, you know, would these folks potentially want to purchase the units in which they live? And so that was our original intent. What we found was that most, I think all at the end, wanted to take the voucher and go elsewhere. So changed our plan, but for the better, I think, and for, you know, leading to those resident voices, being able to do what they're looking to do and not what we think would be best for them. We talked about Chapel a little bit and Housing Panelists, elevation in the city of Fort Collins. Now, this little wheel partnership is how we actually set up. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so again, we did end up with that 171 units. 2 partners that came into play after that wheel was created. First is IDF. So IDB, I guess, because Impact Development Builders is actually going to be doing the work and the rehab work on these units as they come up. We're also working really closely with the EPA, who's coming in, and CDPHE, because we will require some remediation, asbestos, lead paint, and some things like that. Another great partner there. And we have an application into CDH as well to provide another layer of subsidy on the rehab side. To our next one. Really? I think I left a slide out. So the other project I wanted to talk about briefly, because I know we're kind of running out of time, is the Hector Road Townhomes. Hector Road Townhomes are 54 units in an amazingly beautiful area of Fort Collins that was in the city of Fort Collins land bank So yeah, City of Fort Collins, key player here, putting the land into the mix for essentially free, but not cheap. However, it's one of those things where you start out, it's like, if the land's free, you should be able to do it. It should be just fine. And you know what? Initially, it was. But again, when time goes by and things change and new issues come up, that gap grows and grows and grows. And initially, the gap was big enough that a lot of people said it can't be done. But we're like, okay, how are we going to do it? We're going to get the city to put in the land for less than they initially preferred to put it in for. We're going to get that for-profit developer to bring their developer fee down, right? And their return. Again, with the balance. Everyone's looking to balance risk and reward. How can we lower a developer's risk so they're willing to take a little bit less of a reward? And we don't have, we like to say, oh, we got this great system that we work with folks on. And if everything falls in line, it works out perfectly. Nothing ever falls directly in line, right? But it really helps to have that platform at the outset, where we're saying, okay, we're going to lower your risk. We're going to purchase those completed units because we're going to do what we do best, which is to figure out what the community needs, what that real affordable price point is, and how we can keep them affordable resale after resale. Because we don't do really well development. I mean, do we develop? We do. But again, we partner. That's our mission, right? Our mission is to partner. And so I think a lot of partnership is stepping away from ego and saying, I don't do that well, someone else does that well. Let's let the people who do it well step in and do it. And we can really focus on things that we do well. And there's a lot we don't do well. And there's a lot of people out there who do things really, really well. And so I think all of us in affordable housing recognize that we need to kind of step back and really say, I don't do this well, you do it well. Let's all go together in a project where everything is done well. Thanks.
All right, Kristin Candella is going to talk to us about One Voice for Housing and how all you can be involved.
Thank you. This was highly unplanned, but it makes perfect sense to me. So bear with me here. Housing is key. We all agree on that. It's pretty simple. You probably all zone into your own housing story real quick and think about whether that's stable, unstable, how that affected your life. Everybody with me? Yep. Okay. What were some of the key themes that you heard today? And maybe you heard them in the most clear you've ever had. Is this complicated? Raise your hand if you think it's complicated. Okay, yep. I almost cried when Jeff said that they got to a road, because if you've been there, you see that the tip of the iceberg is the road, but everything underneath it was so deep and so long, so hard, nobody sees it. It is really difficult. It's very complex, right? Does it require partnership? Anyone here partnership? Yes, we're raising lots of hands. Okay, so this is very complicated, and the reason that I'm here today is because here we are. We're NoCo Housing Now. This is the choir, right? We all can talk about the benefits of stable housing pretty easily, and we probably come at it from a lot of different angles. We look at pictures like the last slide, the one before, and we'd say, of course it matters. And we all come at it from different angles. We think we cross the whole spectrum, right? Homelessness, rental, home ownership, not just affordable or attainable or market. We say home matters, right? And we get specific about it too. We say housing impacts the total bottom line, and we talk about different things. Talent retention. Kelly said something beautiful recently, which I'm stealing and now I'm sharing with you, that home is where jobs go to sleep at night. Write it down. We might talk about environmental impacts or people driving less and how that lowers the carbon footprint. There's some alignment here in this room on that. We might talk about job attainment, how when you're stable, when you're grounded, you're not driving hours, you're going to go further. Your kids are going to be more stable, they're going to get a better education. You know, the benefits go on and on, right? Is there a lot of agreement on that? Okay. Let's go to the next slide. So, one, you're gonna have to bear with me. I'm not anxious. I drove down from Brighton this morning and I've only had coffee. So I really do feel in a safe space, but bear with me. I really do feel shaky. So going back to the last slide. Sorry, we're not quite there yet. Okay. It is complicated, and yet that is not what resonates with a broader audience, right? You've heard people bring up NIMBY. You're in affordable housing development, you might, like me, have had pitchfork dreams after a neighborhood meeting. That's real, it's happened. There's this overwhelming call in our communities for more housing choice, for more options, and yet it's very easy to get sidetracked by other initiatives. It's very easy to get confused by the complicated nature of it. And what do we as affordable housing people say? It's so hard. It's so hard. We want to get to this AMI. We speak in HUD language, CDBG. We make it even seem harder than it is. And so though we have all these good positive messages, they can be quite fragmented. So how do we get beyond that? We have to get people together to speak with one voice for housing. So there's a lot of research on how affordable housing advocates haven't done this particularly well. And there's a ton of alignment, I think, on connecting on shared values. We believe everyone should have a decent place to lay their head. We believe that. We can share stories. Man, once Natasha stopped moving after moving 14 times in 8 years, then that energy that was going into moving again and again went into getting a better job. It went into being a member of the HOA board. It's just a shift of energy for one particular community member, but what happens when you do that within a whole community? We all want to have a stable home, we want kids to have stability. We're all hesitant of change in our neighborhood. Have you ever been NIMBY? You ever seen a sign in the neighborhood and thought, oh man, what's happening here? And yet data proves that affordable housing does make a community better, that property values tend to increase. We can share a specific challenge that is solvable. When we speak in crisis language, it becomes impossible to make change. We get paralyzed. We have to share hope and opportunity to make a real difference by doing something specific. We all believe this community is very partnership oriented. We're innovative, we work together. That's something to build on. We have to offer specific solutions and action steps and give people that are part of the choir a way to be engaged, give them something to do. Next slide. So here we are, and we have formed a group that is right now named One Voice for Housing. I'm gonna gloss over this really quick, but in February, a group of city, county, housing providers, CSU, Habitat, a developer, Hartford Homes, got together, chamber, board of realtors. I'm gonna forget a few, but we all got together to really spend a day saying, what would it take to actually speak with one clear voice for housing? One voice. Similar to what happened when COVID hit, and we said, let's keep NoCo open. What if we had a message that was so clear and so compelling that people would believe in it and do something about it? So we met, we agreed, we've been meeting for a month. We went in front of the Fort Collins City Council to speak with one voice, to share similar talking points, to come in alignment, to just be a louder megaphone for this issue. Now we're in the process of hiring a marketing firm because we don't even know if One Voice for Housing is the right name. We don't have a logo, we don't have a website, don't Google us. We don't exist. We do want to know, what we're inviting you to before we invite you to the table. But this isn't to counter NIMBY. I want to say that again. Housing deserves a bigger, broader voice than being against something. It's not about neighborhood meetings. This is about the belief that if we do this right, the community will be behind it, and then we can have a much bigger, broader audience if we expand the table and bring more people to it. Is it YIMBY? If you've heard of YIMBY, yes, in my backyard, maybe. Does the YIMBY brand resonate in Northern Colorado? Probably not. So we're working on that right now. Last slide. Questions? All of the humans come up now, Joe?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Do we have anybody online?
We do get no question.
Oh, okay.
I think we're sitting now.
So any questions? Any comments on what you've heard today? Anybody want to jump up and volunteer to take over some of the responsibility from Kristin in organizing One Voice for Housing? Free.
Half the room's already involved, including United Way, sorry.
So, Kristin, maybe if you could just identify who are the partners that are involved in One Voice for Housing.
Sure. Well, let me have you raise your hands and then who's already been engaged at this point. We have United Way, Neighbor to Neighbor, the Larimer County. We have the Board of Realtors. We have the City of Fort Collins. We have Hartford Homes, Chamber of Commerce, and what am I missing, Joe? Gotcha. Oh, Habitat for Humanity and Care Housing, if I didn't say Care already, and Housing Panelists, of course. So the four affordable housing providers in Fort Collins are part of it, but I want to say that this isn't intended to be a bunch of affordable housing people getting together. It really is intended to be a much broader audience that does see the triple bottom line being associated with housing.
I don't see any questions online, so.
Does everybody know what the triple bottom line is a question I just got. People, planet, profit is kind of the simple one, the simple way to say that.
I'm a big Colorado, but also the authority, and I feel like we kind of are working independently. A little bit, we are working with Loveland as well housing, but I feel like how do we get involved? You know, I feel like every community has their own housing authority. Like, is this something that we would come and embrace this? What you are like, what's kind of forming right now, or how can we involve with the bigger scheme of things?
I think it's a bit of a difficult question to answer at this moment because it's still being formed. Imagine that someday we want to be an adult. Right now, we're maybe a toddler. Truly, the engagement piece of it is probably going to be worked out in strategy sessions with the whole group and with the marketing firm, because we're not quite sure what we're asking people to do yet. What I do imagine, and I think the group is aligned on this, is that there would be regular communication, there would be opportunity to take policy positions, there would be a website that has data that we all agree on, and that would have the names of every participating entity on it, so that you can direct people there, and they'll go, oh, well, look at this really diverse group that agrees that this is accurate information, that property values don't go down. So that's what I think we'll be inviting you into right now. I would suspect we'll have a better idea by the fall. I don't know if that answers your question.
I would just maybe interject that, make sure if you're not already on our mailing list for NoCo Housing Now, because we'll use that list of folks that have been participating in these events to keep them apprised of what we're doing with One Voice, because they are kind of parallel initiatives.
Do that one more time. Will we be in Weld County? Will we fold in Weld County? That's a great question. I think speaking of the complexity of what we do, of what we all have been talking about, and the key of being laser focused, I think, to make change, particularly political change. This effort is starting in Fort Collins to influence policies and do advocacy work in Fort Collins. That doesn't mean that if it works, we hope that it could expand and work in other communities, and that everyone would come into it and change it, make it, you know, unique to their communities. Right now, we're starting small to see if it works, and hopefully it'll be something to share.
Had a thought, kind of going with what Jake was saying, it's with them on the Fair Housing Authority board as well, and this kind of goes to Jeff with the work on the Loveland Affordable Housing Task Force. Kristin, I know the roots of this One Voice for Housing and strata, and there are multiple, it's challenging the status quo of all kinds of different groups talking kind of on their own or in parallel, but not actually bringing it all together. I'm wondering how, once you're up and going, lessons learned, how you went through this process, especially when it comes to making change around policy or city code. And I'm pointing at Jeff because we're going to go before Loveland City Council, you know, in the next couple of months with recommendations. And so I guess just to this bigger point, it's more of a common question. I love what you're doing, and I think the more that you're able to share best practices and how that worked or didn't work, or different aspects were successful, that would be really key, as Windsor's going through that same thing, Loveland's going through the same thing as a Northern Colorado group that we're talking with here.
Absolutely. We're certainly going to document how we've gotten here, and Megan has the unique position of having done a StratOp strategic plan with Habitat for Humanity. And if you haven't heard of that or haven't done that, it's been something that we've really come to believe in. It forced us to think a little bit differently about how Habitat for Humanity can grow. You know, and I didn't mention this, that we're in partnership with Odell Brewing that's donating their land and Hertford Homes. And between them and what we're doing with Pure Housing, we have 90 lots ahead of us. And so partnership is critical. And I think that process of having StratOp really changed the way we thought about our business, made me think and made our board think, what if you got a really small group together and did StratOp just around communications? And so that's really what instigated this idea. And, you know, there's a lot more work to come. I wouldn't say we have best practices to share yet, but I do think the alignment that we need this was really a key outcome, because it is so complicated that we could very easily go off and get siloed and keep doing your own thing. Just having monthly meetings is a pretty big win.
This is a question. So I'm gonna pass it right back to you. Hi. Well, I guess first a comment and then a question. And that is, earlier you said that, you know, you didn't want this to be a group of housing organizations, you know, getting together to just talk about that. And that really it's about broadening those partnerships. And one of the things that we've found as we're going into more rural communities, and I think the reason is, I mean, we keep saying, oh, it's so hard, it's so complex. When you get into smaller communities, it kind of gets simpler because there's fewer players. And it's really easy to see how affordable housing opportunity is critical to the way communities run, right? So, you know, the large employers are the ones saying, we need to have affordable housing. We can't keep our employees. We can't keep our cafes open. We can't run the lifts. It's easy to see how there's a direct line between the economy and between housing, right? And so I guess I would ask, are you bringing in large employers and other folks that are sort of, I mean, I guess in a way they're these usual suspects, but other folks that can look at it from a different bottom line, right? It's like we're so used to saying why this is important for families. Why is it important for communities? advising board members?
Yes, there's, in the interest of having a smaller room, we did invite in all of the employers. I envisioned inviting them all in eventually, but Jacob Castillo, who is part of our group, is not a housing, that's not his background, is housing, it's actually workforce development. And so Jacob helped to bring that lens to the room, and so did CSU, and it really struck me hearing them say that about a third of the people that they're trying to bring in, they've made offers to, are now turning down those offers once they look at housing. So it's definitely an audience that we want to bring into the fold eventually, but I would say we're not quite there yet.
Well, we're right at our time, so if I may, I'll take this back. You can just have a yell. No, first of all, let me have all of you help me thank our panelists today. This is hopefully, everyone's going to show up Tuesday night at the Loveland Council meeting, and we'll speak with one voice. So again, thank you all for taking time to join us today. And again, I'm just going to make one more plug. If you're not on our mailing list, please fill out the card so we know how to get a hold of you with future information and follow up on today. And by the way, the sessions are being recorded. Probably should have told you that up front, but too late. But they're available through the NoCo Housing website that's under the Four Palms Chamber. You'll get a link. Everybody that was registered, you'll get a link, so you'll get not only a copy of the presentations that were made, you'll get information on all of our speakers, as well as the recording of this event. So if there's folks that you want to refer to, obviously feel free to go to that link, and actually you'll be able to see previous sessions that we've had as well. So trying to make sure that information is out there. And again, I want to thank all of you for taking your time and sharing your expertise. And thank you for what you do. You're all free to go out and skate.